everybody. Welcome to Performance Anxiety. I'm your host, Mark, and we'd like to welcome drummer Andrew Toy to the Performance Anxiety family. He's played in so many genres of music that I lost count. He likes to use music genres like chords, building one on top of another to create something completely new. And it all began by playing on a cruise ship, but now he's got a solo album out, and it's full of experimental percussion. And it's a true solo album. Andrew plays everything on it. It's called Guardrails, and you really need to check it out. It can be found at andrewtoy.net or at atoydrummer on social media. Check us out at Performance ANX, and you can buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. And merch is available at performanceanx.threadless.com. And I want to thank AKG for sending us this amazing podcast package that they've got. It's got an amazing Lyra mic and some fantastic headphones. And with that, let's get into Andrew Toy on Performance Anxiety.
This is Andrew Toy, and you're listening to Performance Anxiety with Mark Shea. I am a drummer based in the DMV area. I've got a new album coming out. It's called Guardrails. Comes out on January 15th, 2021. More information and CD and MP3 pre-order and all that sort of thing at andrewtoy.net. Yes, that's the one.
So this is one of the few chances I get to have a local guy on the show.
Right.
That's really cool. So you're just in College Park?
College Park, that's right. Yeah. Nice. I moved down to here about 7 years ago from Philly. For that, I was living in I'm from Delaware originally. Okay. And spent some time abroad playing drums, and kind of settled down here, and raising a family and all that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm digging the area. It's nice, kind of a mix of different things, I guess.
Oh yeah, that this whole area is really interesting because there's so many different people. It's so transient.
Right.
So many government employees that are come and gone with every administration.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's crazy.
Right.
However,
we'll say, we're not recording, are we? You can edit this.
Oh, I'm recording. I am the Neil Young of podcasters. I record from the moment I hit call.
I love that because then you can tell in the intro like they don't realize they're being recorded. And it's like just got to be on at all times.
Oh yeah, exactly. Or just be totally off the whole time. One or the other. Either
just
one.
Have a little performance anxiety, and that's fine too.
What I like to do is find out how you got to where you are now. And that usually starts at the beginning, which would be childhood. How did you get into playing music? Was there a lot of music in the house growing up?
So, I mean, probably, kind of a typical story of anybody born, growing up in kind of boring suburbia. In my case, as Newark, Delaware. So like my family is non-musical. I have an older brother that was in heavy metal, which, is always a good sign, for, just to kind of show the way for, like kid that doesn't know for good music.
Right.
And then, starting up in drums, I was 9 when I started, just like any other kid, it's like, oh, here's a cool activity that's not sports or anything stupid. So it's like, and then of course that just like kind of grew and grew. It's like, oh yeah, there's like this kind of community that goes with it, and this belonging, and just like getting better at it. And it's like some kind of nerdy kid could actually be cool somehow, just by getting good at the drums or guitar or anything else.
Right.
So yeah, so I started kind of just like anybody else, playing drums and then when I got out of school, I started playing full time right out of college on cruise ships, which is kind of an interesting sort of gig.
I want to know more about that. So first of all, you didn't jump from starting off on guitar to a cruise ship. So when did you start actually playing? In what kind of bands were you in? What kind of music were you playing?
Yeah. I skipped a step. So when I was in high school and college, I started playing like mostly indie bands. We were friends that were, a couple years older. So, in my eyes, they were like super cool and they had great taste in music. So, that's, I was in a couple like, kind of like post-punk and kind of new wave bands. As a 16, 17-year-old. And then, like more like kind of like synthy kind of stuff, and then more kind of like rock oriented stuff. But, just a lot of like bands, just to kind of like get an experience, playing all like the lousy clubs and stuff like that.
Right.
But, just main thing is just like trying to find like my sound and like, what I like playing, what I like listening to. And then just, kind of just getting out there as much as possible, but then, trying to bridge that gap. And it's like, okay, how do I do this full time? So that's when, other gigs, I like cruise ships and stuff, start to pop up, and
When
you start to,
when did you decide that this was something that you wanted to do full time?
Okay. So this is, really like from high school, but the more like practical side of me says like, oh no, like this is that's nobody can make a living, like,
right?
Blah, blah. Like that voice, so like that nagging voice, like, oh, whatever. So I did
Steady
actually
employment.
Yeah. So I got a degree in computer science just as like a backup plan, saying like okay, like I'll try my damnedest. I'll try to be a professional drummer, but if that doesn't work out, okay, like I can.
You have something to fall back on.
Job. Right. So, but that, maybe gave me like the freedom mentally to be like, okay, like I can just like give it a shot, like kind of nothing to lose. So, but luckily, yeah, I never really had to fall back on it. So it's been all like, just like a string of like different sort of like musical paths ever since then. Which is cool. I mean, it's sort of thing. It just like takes so many like twists and turns, and you can never like script it or plan it. Like it's always going to be, and it's like the weird sort of like opportunities that come in. It's like, oh, this is not at all what I would expect, but it's like, it's more things that in the end, I think just throw into like this melting pot of like somebody like their musical character. It's like, it just becomes part of their DNA. So that's why I'm a big proponent, I guess, of playing anything and everything, just like trying to like absorb as much as possible.
Okay. That's apparent in some of the bands that you've worked with, going back through your musical history. So you've worked with a bunch of people. I mean, I'm looking at some of the people you've worked with. But let's before you started really working with Scythian and Royal Noise, was that after the cruise lines?
It was. Okay, so, so that was after that, when and that's the weird thing about like, being on a cruise ship. I mean, you're literally like, you're so disconnected and remote. I mean, you're literally in the middle of the ocean. It's like, right. You kind of lose all contact with like musicians and reality. So yeah, it's kind of like in some ways like starting from scratch. So came back and kicked around, joined a couple bands like the ones you mentioned. But that, I think, just playing just every single night, like on a cruise ship, even though it's like probably the most square music you can imagine. Right. I mean, it just does so much. I mean, it just opens up your ears, and of course, like just playing with all these different people, and, hearing music for the first time, and getting, talking to people from places I've never, been to, and like, right. All that experience kind of, it gets ingrained. And so, that's the good side of it, I think.
So how did you find out about the cruise line gig, and what is the process for getting that job?
Yeah, it's that's an interesting one. It's like, it was kind of like just on a whim. Like, it was just like, I think my parents had just gone on the only one they've ever been on. And they're like, oh, there's musicians on board. Wouldn't that be neat? And I was like, yeah, wouldn't that be neat? Let me I never considered. And they're like, let me send an email. What the hell? So I did, and interviewed over the phone, and then a month later it's like okay, here's your first contract.
Wow. So is it, the phone interview, was it just like a standard employment interview, or are they asking you what are they asking you as a drummer? I mean,
it's such a weird gig. So it's like you apply for it with your resume, your like performances that you've played on, stuff like that, and like kind of like a just like an artist bio or whatever. And then they talk to you, and they a big part of that gig, which I think is what keeps a lot of people out, is being able to sight read music. So, you got to be able, because like every night it's a different set of music, because they have, the fly on acts doing all their, American songbook kind of stuff, and, all that sort of thing. So they would throw music at you every night, and it's always something new. So they need somebody that can, just fall in one rehearsal and then play 2 shows, and then that's it. And then basically do that every night. So, the interview was actually, they said like, okay, we just sent you a chart, print it out, and played for us in 5 minutes. So
wow.
It's like, so that's basically it. So, it would be like some big band stuff or whatever. So that's where like, I whatever like formal training kind of like helped. So what they said is, and what, kind of, I guess in some ways got me the gig was, I could read the music, I could, play all that stuff. I did all like the kind of the formal training and stuff, but also like I was in rock bands. Like I wasn't some like, kind of music school dweeb,
right.
Where, if I needed to, I could play like a rock tune or, just like play Four on the Floor all night long if I needed to. But there's also that, if I need to read like some extravagant sort of big band chart, that sort of stuff was there too. So I think those two things, and me being, I think it's 22 at the time, that's all like selling points for them. So that was cool. So yeah, that was a few years where I was just traveling the world, just living on boats.
So yeah, so what are you doing in your off time? How much are you playing a day? I mean, how many shows, how many hours, and what are you doing on your off time?
And on the surface, it seems like a dream gig, which in some ways for somebody, in their early 20s that hasn't like, toured much or anything like that. Like it really was, for a while. So usually it would be like, 2 shows at night. So, like 2-3 hours of work, possibly with the rehearsal. So that'd be maybe 3 hours of work. But during the day, you're just in port, all these different places, just kind of like exploring, traveling, all that sort of thing. So it was in some ways, I mean, for somebody that hadn't really gotten out of Delaware very much, it was cool. Just be, there's like 70 something countries I was able to go to.
Oh man.
Just while like, it's coming back and playing drums every night. So yeah, it was pretty cool. Like, I think that's one experience that really, really made me, I guess, the person that I am.
Yeah.
For better and worse. But it's so it was cool. But then after a while, it's like, okay, like what's next? And that's, I think that's any musician, or I guess probably anybody is, what's next? Like, am I going to be doing this like when I'm 30, 40, 50,
right.
Floating around playing American Songbook type stuff.
Right.
So it had its time and place. I don't regret it. The industry itself is kind of lousy, but that's a whole nother
that's a whole different podcast.
But yeah. I don't want to get
so how long,
too negative or anything.
How long did you have that gig for?
2.5 years I did that.
Wow.
So yeah, with little breaks in between, but usually it'd be like 4 months on and a couple days off, 4 months on, a week off, whatever it was.
Wow.
But yeah, you just pick up a ship, any part of the world, any continent, and then just kind of like live on for 4 months.
Wow.
So it's cool. So, I mean, the experience, just being able to, just play music every night and like new music every night, even if it was like stuff I wasn't like into, just that like variety and just having to like adapt. I think that's like the biggest positive thing that came out of it for me. Not to mention, I mean, just like I said, like some kid just getting out of their hometown and like getting out of their comfort zone. And just like,
sure.
meeting like musicians, from around the world. I'd play with like, a bassist from Brazil and a guitarist from Eastern Europe and, whatever, so everybody's coming from all over, and they're all bringing like their taste with them and their MP3 collections too. So it's like, that was actually the first time that I had even listened to like John Zorn was like on a cruise ship.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Or like, I had a buddy that was really into like gypsy music and like all this stuff kind of like blew my mind as like somebody that's, to mostly play just, growing up listening to metal and like alternative and grunge. And, when I was in college, I was on like college radio doing, spinning basically like indie stuff. Mm-hmm. So, a pretty narrow view of things. I mean, I tried to listen to a little bit of everything, but like really just being around all these different people, it's just really kind of exploded for me and just like open my ears, which, that's, I think the best thing for any musician is just opening their ears, just to something.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, you're college radio experience, it's still, you think you're playing a wide variety of music, but it's still kind of provincial. And so you're not, like you said, you're not throwing gypsy music on the radio station, you're not
right.
putting out Brazilian music, right. on whatever college radio station you happen to be listening to or working for. And so I think that's a really great experience. And I can, in listening to the work that you've done, a lot of it makes a little more sense as to how it kind of seeped into the work you're doing now. I can definitely hear it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's why I tell people a lot, like, so I do a lot of like teaching as well, teaching the drums. And I always tell people like, genre is just application. Like I try not to get too into specific, like, idiosyncrasies, like in like lessons. It's like, if you've got timing, groove, technique, all this kind of like basic stuff, then really the musical world is your oyster, then it's just a matter of just like applying, just being able to like figure out where the groove is, what the dynamics are, things like that. So that's where, things get a little bit more, I guess, like genre fluid, in a way, which
that's a great term. I like that.
Yeah, that should be a checkbox on every application. Anyway,
especially for cruise ships.
I'm genre fluid.
Yeah.
Just being just open, having the open ears, and just like kind of throwing everything in the pot. Because that's another thing too that I think about a lot is like influences, like, and how things just find their way into your like musical DNA. So it's like anything you're exposed to, even without thinking like, oh, this is hip, I'm going to incorporate this into this thing that I do.
Right.
Just being like exposed to something and, just like letting it kind of marinate, it becomes part of your musical sort of like expression, I think.
Yeah, dude, I agree with you completely on.
And sometimes things just like come up, and you can not even in like a conscious way. Like somebody will say like, oh, like what you played there, it's kind of sounded like this or that. And it might be something that, I've listened to like at some point, but I never consciously said like, yes, I'm going to make this part of my thing that I do. Like,
okay, yeah.
Like somebody was listening to a recording I made with a great songwriter from DC, Lisa Saeed. To it and said actually recorded with Don Zientara, which I know you had him on a while back. Cool, great guy. I love Don.
Don's awesome.
Yeah, so somebody was listening to him like, wow, and then they said the drums really sound like Morphine, and like I took that as like the biggest compliment, because like they're one of my favorite bands, but I've never once even like jammed along to one of their records or said like, okay, I'm gonna borrow this or that. It's just listening to something 1,000 times, like that's now part of my playing.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point. It just shapes you without even you realizing it.
Right. Which I would imagine it's kind of like where like if you were to move someplace that doesn't speak English, probably without even trying, you're going to start to pick it up. Like if it's in the air, it's like you would have to try hard not to like pick up a phrase here and there or whatever. So
you can't help it. Yeah,
exactly. And so instead of like forcing influences into the pop, you're like, okay, like I'm going to do this and this because it's hip and this person did that or whatever. Just having that like around, eventually like it comes out in so many different ways where the more influences you have, it's kind of like I always think the like analogies. It's like the more ingredients you've got in your soup.
Yeah,
so like,
that's perfect.
Right.
So you toured the world playing all kinds of music on a boat for 2.5 years. What did you do when you decided that it was time to move on?
So it was hard because, like you're in kind of this like vacuum, like at least as far as like the cruising gig. It's not like you have like a night off and you can go play at the club down the street.
Right.
So it was kind of like starting from scratch, and it's kind of tough, because it's like, it's always tough to be a musician, but like when you're really starting from scratch and you have really like no connections. So, was in limbo for a while. And like, especially like after that, like I felt a little lost, where it got to be like where I would just take like any gig that came, which even that's, it's good to have those experiences, I think, just to like, where you're kind of like hungry for it and you want to make it happen, and you can't be too picky. But, so you start taking things out of like survival mode, but then, of course, like things progress and you can start to be a little bit more picky.
Yeah.
But, just putting yourself out there, sometimes like the things that would come would be things that I would never expect. Like, for instance, I played with a couple bands that were in like the Irish Celtic sort of realm, which is a realm that, I knew nothing about, but, these opportunities came along. Suddenly, I'm playing these huge, headlining these huge festivals and stuff, for a little while. like, it's total like imposter. Like, I don't know anything about Irish music, but I can play the drums and I can kind of listen to things and maybe figure out where I fit.
And you can read music. That helps.
Right. So, I mean, especially if I'm like charting stuff out and like trying to remember it myself, like, okay, you've got 30 songs to learn by the gig next week.
Oh,
got it. Okay, cool. That's part of the job for any musician that's playing as like a session kind of player, but that's cool. And that's where like, at some point there, like I kind of made this like, I guess like little mini revelation that it's like, don't hide your influences. Don't be like, oh, I'm in this sort of situation, so I need to sound like such and such, or I need to like, change my playing to please so and so or whatever.
Okay.
Because that's kind of a BS approach, and I think that's like a little dishonest maybe. So it's
that's interesting.
It's like, I'm gonna play this music the way that's like, I mean, I guess kind of like a little bullheaded. It's like, I'm gonna play it the way I'm gonna play it, because
well, if you think about it though, that's perfect, because if any band wants to separate themselves a little bit, they would want you to play your style within their framework. The best players do that.
Right.
You can always, like, you can pick out Jimmy Page no matter what he's playing. You can pick out Jeff Beck, and I'm just going guitars, but you can pick out, I mean, Neil Peart, you can pick him out. Any big name, you can pick these guys out based on no matter what style they're playing, just on how they play. I'm not explaining it very well, but
no, that's exactly right. And I think that's maybe the ultimate goal of any musician, and that's something that's always a work in progress. I think even those great players would probably say the same. It's like,
oh yeah, for sure.
You want it to be able to, like, you have like a voice that somebody's going to recognize when they hear you, no matter what the situation is.
Exactly.
Partly you want to be a musical chameleon where you can kind of like blend in all these situations, but also it's like, everybody's got their own thing, their own like sort of like vibe when they play. That really can't be put into like, any quantitative terms. So that's cool. I mean, I think that's something to be embraced. It's like you refine something, but also like you're going to be you, even if you try not to. Exactly.
Is that when you end up joining Scythian?
Yeah, so that was around that time. Okay. That was like 2011 or so. So that was good. Again, that was like that, situation where it's, stuff I wasn't familiar with, but, just kind of like took it like, kind of head on and kind of got really comfortable with it. So that was a good little run. Got to see a lot of like the Midwest, because the Midwest loves Irish music.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was fun. But I approached it like a rock gig, and it was fun.
Well, and then you moved on to the Royal Noise, which I hadn't heard of before, and I went and listened to some of the music and saw some live clips and all. There's some really interesting stuff going on with those guys. Yeah,
pretty progressive. That was, when I was living in Philadelphia, I met those guys, and if nothing else, got the offer. They got in touch, and it's like, wow, this is stuff that I'm going to have to practice. So that's always a good sign, where it's like, even if nothing else, even if like, it doesn't last for a long time, or even if, it's not, financially great or whatever, at least like I'm going to get something out of it. I'm going to become a better player. So, I think I did, so like, I took it on, we did some kind of light touring up and down the East Coast, and it was cool. I mean, it's very like technical music, a lot of like, very, I don't know, very arranged funk, I should say.
Okay.
So there was a lot of like very specific things, some like odd things or whatever. So that was great. I mean, this is really like, everybody had to be like such good listeners and all great musicians. I think they still play in some form of the band. Everybody kind of does their own project from that era. Okay. But yeah, I mean, it's really stuff that like just makes you a better player. So I think that, I mean, that's always something. It's like when something comes up, like, I might have some opportunity to play with somebody. That's always one of the questions. Is like, is this going to improve me in some way? Or, is this something that I'm going to feel just really just like, kind of like bored and, just kind of like, like spinning my wheels? Or is it something that's going to like really like, make me think about music a little bit differently?
Okay.
And, and when that happens, it's like, yeah, like that's something that's always worthwhile. Or even like, I'll get calls for percussion, which, I'm a drum set player first and foremost, but I do more and more, like percussion, like hand percussion and like just different kind of ethnic percussion.
Okay.
And that's great. Cause like, it's like, where the first thing is like, I'm no this or that player. Like, what am I doing? I'm an imposter. But then like, I try to do it. It's like, okay, like, I guess I got this. And then, that kind of helps me grow a little bit as well. So that's always a good thing, too, and also I think knowing when to jump, I think that's something that I think a lot of musicians, could, take to heart, is like knowing when that the growing process is stopping. So like when I stopped, for instance, playing on cruise ships, like I felt like I stopped growing and it stopped being this cool experience. And same thing with like a couple of the bands that you mentioned. It's just like, okay, this was great. Nothing wrong with it, but I'm going to move on. Like, because exactly.
So then because just instead of becoming a fun experience and like you were mentioning, an opportunity for growth, it just becomes a job. Yes. And
that's always like where the creativity starts to die and it just starts to be a grind like any other job. So in some ways I'm glad that I've never had like with any bands, like any huge success, because there's no like pressing, like demand, I've got to, honor these commitments, like, I'm used to making X amount of dollars per appearance,
Right.
So like that, so you can see, sometimes people might get stuck in that. But I mean, if it's a great position, a situation where like the music's great, the people are great, whatever, then of course do that forever. But it's like, I'm always like still looking, I'm still like kind of restless in that way, I think.
You're a hunter.
I guess. For what? I don't know. Rhythmic expression, I guess.
Now, are you doing session work this whole time as well?
I am. So, and in that too, it'll be just like the randomest things will come in. People will come across me on the internet or word of mouth. So I do record here at my home studio in Maryland. So I do remote work here. And that's something, cool. Of course, that's picked up, this year.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Necessity. But it's great because I think, there's not a whole lot that's great about this year, but any like silver lining might be like people are now like maybe a little bit more independent, a little bit more willing and able to do things on their own, which is cool. So I'll do remote sessions here. I'll teach drum lessons from here. And it's cool. Like it's so convenient. Now, maybe it's no replacement for the real thing, and of course I miss seeing people and being in studios and stuff like that, but it is nice to have that option. And the technology, for all the woes of technology, like it's great that like somebody with like a kind of whatever a setup can actually record something decent, like even like compared to like 10 years ago. It is kind of cool, and like I'm maybe a little bit into all of technology sometimes.
Oh yeah, and I think one thing that I've seen grow just in the people that I've spoken with on the podcast is the willingness for people to send each other files, to do things virtually, and to let's say they need a session drummer, they'll send you their stems or whatever file they're working on, and like, yep, okay, now instead of saying, well, let's get somebody local, they're here, they're into the studio, and they're just like, here's the file, go have at it and send me back what you got and we'll see if we like it.
Absolutely. And that's such a cool freedom. I mean, it's really like a smorgasbord for anybody. It's like looking to collaborate, because like, for whatever, it doesn't matter how niche something is, like, you can find that guy that is doing that thing and just hit them up. And, if people are like genuinely doing like creative things and they're not just like hired gun, like kind of, what am I looking for? Anyway, somebody that's just like doing a job, then it's like, somebody's going to be out there that's up to collaborating. So that's cool. I think, we're going to find, hopefully, there's been a lot, and I think there already has been a lot of good stuff made this year, because people are, both looking inward because they're working with themselves more, but they're also looking outward maybe a lot more than they're used to, because now like with the internet, they've got like fingers and toes in like every corner of the world. So it's interesting. I think some good things might come of this year.
And with a lot of performing artists, they've got to come up with a new stream of income, and putting out an album or a single could be one source. And if you're not a multi-instrumentalist, you got to farm some of it out. And if you can't be out socializing and having people in the studio, then this is the way you've got to do it.
Yeah.
So I saw a list of people that you've kind of shared the stage with. I mean, not kind of shared the stage. You definitely shared the stage with.
I mean, a lot of that. I mean, it could literally be like, especially someone like the legacy acts. If you're looking where I think you're looking online, it could have even been like literally like a one performance, like
but
sort of thing.
But it's still awesome. It's still a whole bunch of really amazing people, like Chris Ammett from Arch Enemy. I mean,
yeah. I mean, again, one of those like random connections. So I met him. He hasn't been on the show, has he?
No, not yet.
So he when he left Arch Enemy, he moved to Philadelphia of all places, which is where I was living. And he has his own solo project. He writes great music, very very much like kind of like older hard rock sound. Yeah. And he wanted to play out live, and he was in a new town, so he kind of seeked out some local players. So he found me, I think it's like 2012 or 13. I think that was like through Craigslist.
Wow.
So like,
and you weren't murdered.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the one post, because you get all these, obviously like, people just starting out or whatever, just a lot of jokers and clowns. Oh yeah. But then it's like, hi, I'm Chris. I used to play in this band Arch Enemy. Would you like to play these songs with me? And like, wow. It's like, jeez. Wait a minute, really? Are you? So and I look, it's like, sure enough, there he is. Like, yeah. So we rehearsed a couple times. We played, I think, a total of one show in Philadelphia. But he already, he had some different ideas. He shortly after moved to New York City, and he resurrected an old project of his, Armageddon, which was a lot more like metal. So he had some metal guys up in New York City that he was working with. And then in the meantime, I moved down to Washington, D.C. So anyway, so we crossed paths just briefly, but that was cool. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, it's like, am I metal enough to play with Arch Enemy? And then it's like, sure you are, sure, fake it till you make it. But it's because I grew up on that kind of stuff, not necessarily Arch Enemy, but yeah, like I love it. So yeah, that's just one of those other things. It's like, yeah, this is going to stretch me in a different direction, because it's like, I'm playing with like, some Celtic band, some funk band, and then this like metal god wants to play some gigs. So it's like all this stuff, like, I mean, it's all like related, and it's all just like, kind of like one hand feeds the other. So that's cool. I mean, that's honestly like the kind of shit I live for. It's like when you get like an email coming in, it's like, musician inquiry, and it's like, oh god, what's it going to be? Like most of the time nothing, but like sometimes it's like, oh man, like this is cool.
What are some of the weird things that you've been requested to do? I mean, have you gotten any strange percussive requests?
So one, it's like, and sometimes like, it's like a one-off thing, and then like, that's it, whatever, everybody shakes hands and goes away. Other times, like sometimes it develops, and like, one thing leads to like, maybe a string of gigs, like, or like friendships and stuff like that. So I got an email. I think the guy was looking, and he was looking for an Irish drummer, and he found he knew what I'd done before. Bagpiper that wanted a tapan player. And a tapan is like a Bulgarian style bass drum that you play on both sides. And he wanted a drummer to play with him for the Maryland Renaissance Festival. Oh, wow. So, I mean, so at first I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is so far outside of my wheelhouse. It's like, how do I say no politely? Yeah. But on the other hand, it's like, what? Like, this could be cool. You never like regret saying yes to something. I mean, I most of the time, most of the time I don't regret saying yes to something, but sometimes you say no to something. It's like, that could have been cool. Yeah. So anyway, like I thought like, I'm not putting on a kilt and going to a Renaissance festival, but now, I mean, that was 5-6 years ago, and I've done that every year now. Oh, wow. It'll be like, that's awesome. Not nine weekends a year. I mean, not this year, but 9 weekends in the fall playing mystical, magical music with a bagpiper and a bouzouki player. And, Piper Jones is the band. They've become dear friends of mine, great musicians, great people. They come up every week from North Carolina and Tennessee to play this music. So again, that's one of those things that just like it pushed me in another direction that I had no idea. I was way outside of my comfort zone at first. I thought like, oh, I'm too cool for this. I'm a serious, I'm a serious drummer here. But then like, I ended up like getting into it and be like, yeah, this is fun. Like, cause like, and just, I mean, that's, the cheesy thing is like, you get on stage and, 100 people or whatever, are jumping around, having a ball. It's like, yeah, like this is cool. Like, I'm not too cool for that, So yeah, that's one of those random things that, has really like nothing to do with like anything else that I do, but it's fun and and it kind of checks all the boxes. The people are fun, the music's fun, the money's fun. It's like yeah, like why not? I'll do it. So that's one of those random things. Other times like like the other day, there's a local band that recorded a song and they had a part on glockenspiel that they did on MIDI and they wanted a live drummer to replace those sounds with a real glockenspiel. So that's like some like random stuff. It's like, okay, it's a Tuesday morning. I'm going to do some analog glockenspiel. Awesome.
That's crazy.
So that's the kind of like random stuff I just live for. So that's fun. And I think it's all related. It all helps. And then, it's kind of like, the void between these things is what led to like my solo stuff, and that's was like kind of taking all these like missing bits and pieces and kind of like forming them into like something a little bit more personal, a little more cohesive.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Well, I can definitely hear all of this now. It's making a lot more sense hearing your solo album, where some of these influences have come from, some of these sounds that I'm hearing on that album, where they've come from, because you've got a really wild expanse, a huge palette of sound coming through on that album. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about it. I really find it interesting when a drummer like yourself, or I like Tim Fogarty from L1011, you combine the acoustic and the electric together.
Right.
When did you start doing that? And how challenging has that been?
So, I mean, and that's something, and that in some ways maybe it relates to like the name of the album is Guardrails.
Yes.
And it's this idea, that I had of like trying to like bounce between different things, different kind of guardrails, and the little parameters that we give to ourselves, whether it's like, intentional or not, like, oh, I don't want to go too far in this direction. I don't want to go too far in that direction. But also it's like, when you're just doing things yourself, I mean, those guardrails can be very spaced out. Like there's a lot more wiggle room to do whatever. So electronics, I mean, that's maybe like another influence that like, I never really got into like, I'm a drummer, so I don't like to like program beats or like finger drum or anything like that, because I like doing the real thing. But that's always been an influence. Like like when I was maybe in high school, I started really getting into like the whole IDM stuff, like Aphex Twin and Square Pusher, and those are still huge influences on me. Obviously, stuff that's like most of the time not live drums. It's all electronic, but it's all rhythm, it's all sounds and textures, and that's I kind of like maybe incorporated into my playing. So that's something that's always been kind of like part of my, again, like musical DNA, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. But I started to kind of work it in like maybe 2016. So I was kind of working up this solo project that's kind of, culminate right now in this album of basically playing drums, but in real time, applying effects to them and even like automating those effects. So, so all the sounds are live. They're all coming from an acoustic drum. And that's maybe like where I set like the parameter. Like I try not to rely on samples or anything like that. I'm not hitting little rubber pads. So I like this idea of hitting real drums, but hearing the sound like just get all like mangled and distorted and kind of turning into something else. Something guitarists have been doing for decades, right?
I was just going to say that. I mean, it sounds like you're taking a guitarist's approach to the drums.
Exactly. And that's why I like to see it. It's like, and now it's like, well, I mean, the technology is there, which I mean, even 10 years ago, maybe it would have been a little bit lacking. But just the idea of like making the drums sound like something they're not. And that's something like in music, I always think is interesting. Like when you try to switch instrument roles, like as like Brian Eno would say, like switch to instrument roles, maybe now like the drums are the melody instrument, the guitar is the rhythm instruments, and so on like that. Maybe the keyboards sound like a guitar and the guitar sounds like a keyboard or something like that. So that I think is pretty fun. So that's how like that started to come together. And of course, like, working. So I try to do that stuff when I play live. So I'm running the drums through software, and I'm making the drums change their sound through time. But when I'm recording, of course, there's no limits. So things can get as crazy as we want. But so that's always like that sort of electroacoustic balance is something that I really kind of dig, and like trying to find that sweet spot between the two.
Now, when you're playing these songs live, you're trying to not use samples, right? So you're I'm assuming you're looping, and so you have to build these songs up piece by piece. Yeah.
So live, I mean, they're very different versions of some of these songs, and it kind of worked the other way around, where like my first goal with this project was to have a live show, and then work it up enough until I could turn it into an album. Now, 2020 happens, and now like the live shows stop. So then like I kind of like fast tracked like putting this into an album. So most of the songs on the album started with like live improvisations, basically like formalizing them and giving them a little bit more structure and a little bit more meat. But you're exactly right. When I do it live, it's a lot of looping. And I'm actually like automating the looping and the effects and stuff like that using Ableton Live. Okay. And that's how I'm able to do all this stuff with, some consistency without like, jumping around on a pedal board or anything like that. So I'm using, the software to kind of like, play through like the structure of the song, but all the actual sounds are live. They're coming from the drums. But, it might be like where I loop myself for a couple measures, but then that loop gets treated. Now that's maybe pitched down an octave, or a fuzz starts to fade in on it or something like that. So the drums, like, just hitting a single drum, could now turn into like this like melodic element. So it's all starting from the live, sort of like hitting an instrument, and just basically seeing what kind of action I can get from just that, without putting on samples and stuff like that or backing tracks, which is fine and whatever. But I try not to use that. So that's maybe another one of those like sort of like personal challenges or guardrails I set up, is like, can I make a piece of music using just the drum set without it sounding bad or sounding like a drum solo? Right. Because, and that's maybe another sort of extreme that I try to avoid, is like solo drums doesn't necessarily have to be a drum solo, which is
exactly.
And
unfortunately, that's when a lot of people check out.
Exactly. That's where I check out too. I mean, I love drums, but it's like, man, drum solos, most of the time just cheesy. But when it's like, it's musical, it's well done, there's, different elements, and it's not just a fireworks show, then it can be like really hip. So I try to avoid that, because, I know not everybody is a drumming enthusiast. So I try to, basically pull out these like more melodic options out of the drums, more like maybe polyrhythmic things like that. So taking a lot of inspiration from like folks like Steve Reich, like early like minimalism music, where it's like just rhythms and just like overlapping rhythms can make this like incredible piece of music sometimes. Yeah, for sure. So it's a little bit it's a little bit different for people that are used to hearing just a very specific instrumentation. But I think that's like kind of where at least for me, like where the excitement comes from, because it is, sometimes it feels like, people have done things like this before, but sometimes it feels a little bit more uncharted. And that's when things are scary, but also exciting.
Well, you use some really interesting techniques, like playing aluminum bottles and bells that are actually, sitting on your toms.
Sure.
There's some really interesting techniques that I saw in your videos. And it's really fascinating to watch you do that, not just to hear it, but to watch you do it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's what, I mean, I think people always tell me it's like, you know what, when I go to a show, I always watch the drummer because you can see exactly what's, where the sound's coming from. Yeah. And it's like, you know what? Yeah, me too. Like, I mean, that's a good point. Because it is such like an instant sort of thing. And, even, kids know this. I mean, you hit something that makes a sound. Yeah. That never stops being fascinating. It's like, oh, this bucket sounds like that. Like that plate sounds like that. Awesome. Like, let's see how many different sounds you can get, so yeah. I mean, so basically I feel like a kid, like when I'm in like, my home studio, I'm just throwing things on the drums, throwing up like pieces of scrap metal or whatever. And, without getting too like avant-garde or, but, you can, but, just like, as long as it still grooves and it still kind of like drives, it's like, cool. I'm all for it. Like throw it in the pot. So I like to think I'm more of like a textural drummer, and a buddy of mine said that about me. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm going to use that.
I like that. Because it kind of sounds to me, and textural drumming, that's a great description. It sounds like a Will Calhoun kind of style.
Love him. Yeah.
And because I've been fortunate enough to see Living Colour a few times, and he's got a lot of different things going on. It's not your traditional drumming sounds, and
he always does that solo, like where he comes out front with his like crazy drum and like,
what is that thing that it looks like?
He plays on a wave drum. It's like this. So Korg makes these things. It's like it's basically like an acoustic drum. But it's basically taking like the wavelengths and the physics and stuff and converting that to an electronic signal. So, so that's one of those. I mean, it's in a cool way. Like it's samples, but it's being controlled from like a physical like drum head.
Because it looks like he's just coming out with an artist's canvas and just smacking a piece of canvas around.
Yeah, and he's got like a guitar pedal, like a pedal board. So yeah, I mean, he's definitely like he's on that level. Like, I mean, it stops sounding like drums, but it's still like, because like he's such a badass. Like it sounds groovy. Like everything sounds cool that he's doing. It never gets to like too arty or anything like that. So yeah, definitely like I dig stuff like that for sure.
So how long have you been working on the songs? Because I love your YouTube channel. I went back and I was watching a bunch of your videos, and I saw that about 4 years ago you did a version of one of the songs on Guardrails called Noosa.
Sure. Oh man. I appreciate the deep dive.
That's my thing. I love doing this.
Love it. I'm flattered. So that started off, so every piece has like some sort of inspiration. The inspiration there, and that's probably like the earliest one that found its way in like kind of a different mangled up form onto the album. Was that song. So that was inspired by like, that was shortly after a trip my wife and I had taken to Indonesia. Of course, like I was kind of rooting for going to Indonesia just selfishly because like musically it's so exciting to me, like gamelan music, especially like Balinese music. Cool. So like, I was there, I tried to soak up as much of that as I could drag my wife to, so that like, I was just trying to absorb, because that's such a different music world as gamelan music. And I even, I picked up the, just a very like kind of cheap, almost like a kid version of like a gamelan metallophone, I guess. So that's what you would have seen in that video.
Is that little thing you're kind of like plucking with your thumbs, or?
So that's a kalimba, the thumb piano. The gamelan piece, it looks like a little xylophone, but with like metal bars.
Yes.
But yeah, just one of those sounds that's like, as soon as I hear that, it's like, we talk about music taking you to a different place. And that, it's a cliche, but it's a true one, right? It's like when I hear stuff like that, it's like, yes, like I feel like I'm in Indonesia. I'm in like this like tropical, like wild kind of place. Yeah. Just by hearing just some of those sounds. So that was, my like Western person's take on like what I was feeling. So it's taking all this like, thousands of years of intense, great musical culture and putting it through the filter of like somebody like me, which is like definitely like a bastardized version. That's fine. Whatever. It's, but maybe I hear it in a different way from somebody that's like around it as part of their life.
Yeah, exactly. And it all goes into your influences, your little quiver of things that influence you later on down the road.
Absolutely. And it's like, you never know when these things are going to come up, or it's like, oh, hear a sound, or just like a little like structure or something that's like, oh, like that's hitting me like that. It feels like, like a piece of like a gamelan piece. And that's cool. I mean, that sort of thing, like, it's not like appropriating music. It's like more like just adding it into like the stew,
Yeah.
It's like,
well, because cool. It's influencing you. You enjoy it. If you like the way it sounds, why wouldn't you want to try to play that style?
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, it's all sounds, it's all textures. Now, of course, some music has such like cultural baggage, and of course, we always respect that. Yeah. But that can be kind of like a pretty high bar for entry. For like, because it's like you only have so many lifetimes. I'm not going to be like this like master world percussionist of like every single style or anything like that. But it's like, I can kind of fake my way through it, and I can kind of like combine it all together and make something that maybe sounds a little bit unique. And if I can, awesome. That's all I want. Well,
this album is really cool, and it's very unique. So you hit the nail on the head with that one, because songs like Daytime Raccoon is awesome. I like your suspicions suite, the sneaking suspicions with the suspicion confirmed.
Thank you.
Those are fantastic. One of my favorite tracks though is Man Frog.
Oh, sure.
First of all, it's a really cool track, but how do you name these tracks? Where the hell did Man Frog come? There has to be something behind that. Funny
story there. Well,
good.
I was hoping you're the first person. I was hoping somebody would ask me this. I was hoping somebody would. So I have two kids. I have two boys. They're 1 and 3.
Oh, wow.
And of course, you have kids, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 3 teenagers.
Oh man. And so I'm glad that you've survived. So,
yeah, me too.
That gives me hope.
Well, wait. There's their birthdays go from October through January. So I've got, let's see, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a soon-to-be 18-year-old.
Gosh, I mean, what causes that, right?
Yeah, but okay. I found out I kind of liked it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my 3-year-old, like, just out of the blue, his name is Joe, and I think this might have been when he was 2. He was like, "Daddy, I saw the Man Frog," and I'm like, I'm like, the hell? Like, what is the? And he tried to describe it like, it's all like toddler nonsense. Like, oh God, like, okay, sure, we'll just go with that. But then like the next day we're watching TV, and a commercial comes on for Geico. And he says, "Look, Daddy, it's the Man Frog."
Oh my gosh!
So like, I guess he saw like the gecko mascot on like a billboard. And in his little brain, it's like okay, it's like a man. It's like it's this talking creature, but it's like a frog too.
That's amazing.
It's a man frog, and so he tells me this. I'm like, oh, that's great. That's going to be a song title or something.
Oh my gosh.
So now like when we see like the gecko on TV, it's like, oh, it's the Man Frog.
Oh, he'll always be the Man Frog to me now too.
But yeah, it sounds way more creepier or sinister than it really is.
Especially coming from a 2-year-old.
Right. That's like, but it was nothing sinister about it. I mean, it was just, the corporate mascot.
That was like when my kids were little like that. They I'm trying to remember how this happened. there may have been the house was a little older, maybe some creaking or something had fallen down, and I asked my kids what happened, who dropped something. They said, Mr. Nobody. I'm like, what the fuck is Mr. Nobody? And that just creeped me right the hell out, because I'm like, Mr. No, that's like the name of something from a horror movie. Like, yeah. How did my like 6-year-old kid come up with Mr. Nobody? They're not watching horror.
That's the worst, like James Bond villain. It's like, Mr. Nobody will see you now. Oh,
I'm thinking like some like Candyman's coming out or something from Silent Hill or something. I'm like, what in the hell? I had to sit them down and at one point, like, okay, tell me about this Mr. Nobody. What is this? And like, we're just joking around, Dad. Okay, thank God.
The things you worry about that you never thought you'd have to, like Mr. Nobody.
I know.
Yeah. But they say the damnedest things, and it's just like it shows how like crazy brains are when they're developing, and how crazy the English language is.
That's a good point too. I was listening just a little while ago before we started recording, and the song Asymmetry is really cool because you've got this middle section that to me sounds like a drumming shoegaze.
I love that.
It's just, it's like, it's just, that's the only way I could think to describe it. It's like if you took shoegaze guitar, but made a drum do that.
Yeah. And it's like, and I think probably like anybody, like I struggle to describe this album. So, I'm going to use that if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
So, any clever descriptors, I'd appreciate.
I'm full of BS. I can send you all kinds of stuff.
I mean, hopefully, there's, it sounds like something and not, it sounds like a little bit of everything and not like a lot of nothing. That's what I hope.
It's really cool because you've got these great things going on. Like, I'm struggling to remember which it was on your YouTube channel. One of the snippets, which I don't remember which one it was, but you've got this really cool thing where you're hitting the cymbal and it's got this. It's completely distorted and it just decays after a while. It is just really cool.
Oh, okay. So I think that's, if I'm not mistaken, that's like where I'm holding the microphone up to the cymbal and getting all like the low overtones.
Oh, that is really cool.
So it's like, just like messing around with like mic techniques like that. It's like, you don't realize like how, just changing like the sound, like where the ear is or where the microphone is, like, how the sound changes, and like you'll think of like like a big cymbal has all these like low rumbly kind of things going on, and that sound comes up a couple times on the album because like it's just like so cool and like so like beefy and sinister, but it's just a lowly cymbal.
Well, it sounds amazing, and what I thought was really cool was the live show that you've got up there on your YouTube video too, because you're showing that I can see how you're building these tracks up and playing them live, and it's so amazing. And
thank you.
One of my favorite tracks is Seasick Rendezvous. That is a cool ass tune.
Thank you. Which kind of morphed into on the album the song "Disaster Pendulum,"
which is another. I love that track.
And a lot of it is just like hitting one thing and just seeing how many sounds you can milk from it. Like just like using like plugins and effects and things like that. So like a lot of them are just like, kind of bell sounds or like kind of ringy sort of sounds, but or just like taking like a quiet sound, like there's a frame drum take in there that comes up a lot, and just overdriving the hell out of it. So now it sounds like this like weird percussive like electric guitar kind of thing. But all from like say like a frame drum, or like there's some like tongue drums on there, which is like like pieces cut out of the drum to give different tones.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of stuff like that. But that's maybe a little bit of the idea, is it's like trying to obscure the sound source, so it becomes this different thing altogether that maybe it's hard to pick out like what the parts are, but hopefully the overall piece it sets a mood, maybe.
Well, I mean, the album is really experimental, really fascinating to listen to, because it's like you said, it's not an hour-long drum solo. It's
thank God.
Yeah, exactly. It's got elements of world, of jazz, a lot of experimental stuff. It is just really interesting, and you're the only one on the album. You're playing everything, which blows me away.
Thank you, sir. I like this shoegaze drumming thing, so I'm gonna stick with that. Because I mean, that's a huge influence. I mean, I've been, shoegaze music has been always like a big influence on me.
I love shoegaze.
Which obviously, like for guitarists, I mean, that would be like a bigger deal. Like for drums, it's like, well, I mean, the drums aren't like a big part of it usually, but but just the sound and like sort of like the atmosphere. I guess it becomes part of my musical DNA, maybe. So like on that song, there's definitely like all those kind of shoegazy synth sounds, but meanwhile there's all this like Brazilian percussion, so it's like, here's a juxtaposition that you don't hear every day. So
yes, I
dig that.
And the album has a lot of that, where you like you said, you're juxtaposing things that don't normally go together, that a lot of people honestly wouldn't think to put together. So hats off to you for being so creative and open to so many different styles of music, and combining them to create something new and unique.
Thank you. So I love there's an interview I like with John Zorn. He's talking about how he looks as genre as like building blocks the way that most people look at like chords. So instead of like building up a song with like some chord progression, build it up where like maybe each phrase or each measure is like a different style or something like that.
Wow.
And and then that's something like also like Mr. Bungle for like a more like rock example. Like they kind of definitely take a few pages from that book, where it's just like, it's a roller coaster. Like nothing is off limits. Like who says you can't like go from like a measure of death metal to a measure of lounge jazz? Like where's the rule that says that? And it's like, it's if you're expecting to like, well, I mean, I guess it depends on what your expectations are when you listen to music. If it's to go for a ride and like really like have somebody like just mess with your head, then it's like, yeah, like that's the thing.
Yeah, Mr. Bungle's good for that. Yeah,
right. I mean, if you're just trying to, have a good time and entertain dinner guests, like maybe it's not the thing. But but for everything else, for like more intense listeners, it's like, yeah, like that's cool. And like you could listen to 100 times. It's still like when I listen to like, Naked City or California by Mr. Bungle, like every time like I hear new things, it's like, this is exciting every time for me.
Oh yeah. And when my dad comes over, I'm not playing My Ass Is on Fire. So I don't think he'll appreciate it as much as I do.
Yeah, maybe, right?
So do you know? Well, yeah, that's a good point. So do you see foresee a Neil Peart sized kit for you at any time to have to pull some of this stuff off?
No, and like I try to be as minimal as possible, because that's maybe another one that's like, well, first of all, just like for convenience, like I don't want to like my load-ins to be
you gotta drag all this in yourself.
It's like, oh, I can't play here. They don't have 40 square foot of space for me on stage.
Right.
But like, that, and that's another one that's like again, going back to this idea of like, setting your own limitations or your own guardrails. I like playing with the small kits, and like actually the longer I play, the smaller my kit gets.
Oh, really?
Like especially when I play live, because like, I find I get a lot more focused. It's just like, if you've got all these options, it tends to, I mean, obviously you can do cool things with a lot of stuff, and there's plenty of people that do that.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you can only paint with a couple colors, then you're going to get a lot more nuanced, And I love making that like visual art example, because it's like, if you've got one subject you have to draw and you can only use 2 or 3 colors, you're going to like dig into a lot of these like nuances, like all these like little avenues that maybe you wouldn't have even thought of otherwise. Whereas like if you've got like a full palette of 100 colors and you've got an unlimited canvas, it's like that can be a little like daunting. It can be actually maybe a little bit like, too much freedom.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. I love like, when I'm teaching like experienced players, I love like the look of fear when I say like, okay, like, pick up your sticks, play a drum solo, and it's like, oh God, like where do I even begin? Like, what's, that's a good way just to freak somebody out. Just like ask them to play a solo. And I guess that could be any instrument.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's like, okay, play a solo, but let's start with these parameters, start on this drum, start at this tempo, use this subdivision, blah, 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 all this and that. It's like, okay, now that gives a little bit narrower of a focus. So that actually ends up being like a more creative thing.
That is a recurring theme on this podcast, is having a framework actually makes you more creative.
Right. And I love that that idea. And that's, so much so that the album is guardrails. That it's like, that's, I think, the best players are the ones that are working with like the smallest palettes, whether it's like, like a vocalist with a small range, or a horn player with like a limited range, or somebody that just like doesn't play their instrument very well, like that's all like stuff that's going to make what they play a lot more authentic, a lot more interesting maybe than some music school type, and nothing wrong with that, whatever. But somebody that has like a lot of knowledge about something, but no real like, vision,
right.
That. So, I'm a big fan of limitations.
Yes.
And it gives you a little bit of confidence too. It's like, oh yeah, like you don't need this and this and this to make beautiful art. Just listen to any great punk or hardcore. Like, it's they did a lot with a little, and it still kicks.
Well, look at Inner Ear Studios. Everything was recorded in Don Zantara's basement for years. Right,
and we still listen to that stuff because it's awesome music.
Yep. Bringing everything full circle. Exactly,
and that's so inspiring. Like in so many ways. Like even if you take the music out 100%, like just the whole message of like all that movement. And that's something obviously that's a big DC thing, and then like that's inspiring. And I take a lot of inspiration from that. Like I love Fugazi and stuff like that, even though of course I'm not playing anything that sounds remotely like that, but just like the music sounds great, the thought behind it was great, like the ethos is amazing. Like the process is as important sometimes. Well, I love the album. I love the artwork. The album cover is fantastic. It's very striking. Thank you. I did it myself. Really? That was, I love that. I was a photographer for years, so I'm very visual, and excellent. I absolutely love it. It's really interesting, very striking. Thank you. I appreciate that. So where can people find the album? How can they order it? Pre-order? Sure. So there's a pre-order on my website, andrewtoy.net. And I'm on all the social things, all at A Toy Drummer. And that's about it. The album comes out January 15th on all the online things, but I have CDs and downloads available for pre-order. Are you doing any live streams? I did at the beginning of the pandemic, because I actually had like a pretty cool show lined up end of March. Yeah. So of course, obviously it's been a bummer for everybody, but that was going to be super cool. It was at a cool venue in Georgetown on a Saturday night, and I was headlining. When it became more and more like, okay, that's not going to happen. I started setting up for like live streams, and I did a couple, and it's pretty good reception. I definitely have kind of like mixed feelings about like the live streams. I kind of like, instead of going that route, because I see some people are like just full on like, this is we're going to treat it like we're playing normal gigs, but only it's on their iPhone or whatever. Right. And that's cool. I just it doesn't really work for me as much, so I decided to like put that time instead into recording this album. Okay. And putting it out there, so that when things hopefully get back to normal. And people are, I think, going to be like so ready to see live music, whenever that is. Who really knows? That's the $1 million question. But when they're ready, so I'm now like revamping my my live show, cool. to make it incorporate the album more into it. So hopefully that'll be thing. So I'm basically just like preparing now, like, having the album, but also like, always experimenting, recording new things, but also like getting the live show more like just ready for when things are up and running.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, when things open up, I will definitely be there because I'm local and I can get there. And I will bring my camera
from DC.
About an hour and 15 minutes or so.
Oh, that's it? Okay. Cool.
Yeah. It's 75 miles almost due west of DC.
That's right.
So I'm not too far. Depending on traffic, it can be anywhere from an hour and 10 minutes to an hour and a half. But
got it. Cool.
But I had a blast chatting with you.
All right. Nice to meet you, Mark.